ground control to Major Tom.
7, 6,
Commencing countdown, engines on.
3, 2,
Check ignition and may God's love
Lift
be
off.
with you.
That's a beautiful song by David Bowie called Space Oddity. It was released in 1969, right before the first moon landing. It was a time when there was a huge fascination with space and going to space. The US and the Soviets were in a highly competitive space race. The 60s saw the first man, the first woman, and the first dog in space. Also, the first spacewalk, the first orbit of the moon, and finally in 1969, the moon landing. In 1968, which is a year before, Stanley Kubrick, who's the legendary director, released a futuristic science fiction movie called 2001: A Space Odyssey. This movie pioneered many special effects and showed space flight accurately on film for the first time. The reason that movie is important for this podcast is that David Bowie has actually said that Space Oddity was inspired by that movie. Space Oddity's release was actually timed to coincide with the moon mission in 1969. But however, the story of the song is a sad one where the astronaut actually is lost to space and loses communication with Earth. Um, and because of this, the BBC actually did not air the song until the Apollo 11 astronauts were safely back to Earth. Um, this was a song that not just broke like a new ground musically, but also resonated with the times. So it's an iconic song, and I thought it would be cool to dive into it today. So welcome to episode 8 of the Listening Sessions podcast. David Bowie's vocals and lyrics in this song are like absolutely beautiful. What you'll notice is that in many parts of the song, David Bowie's voice is double track, meaning that he sang it twice and then they layered it on top of each other. And the cool thing is, his voice harmonizes with itself. So the one track harmonizes with another, and this is something even the Beatles did. But in this song, it really comes out very strongly because there are uh, two people who are kind of talking to each other, right? Like ground control and Major Tom. So in that sense, it adds like a really uh, wonderful effect. So let's take a listen, and you can look out for that.
And I'm floating in the most peculiar way. And the stars look very different today. For here am I sitting in a tin can, far above the world. Planet Earth is blue, and there's nothing I can do.
And then there are the lyrics. I mean, it's told like a conversation between ground control and Major Tom, and it's beautiful imagery that David Bowie evokes in his lyrics. It's a great example of like showing and not telling, right? He uses different phrases and images. For example, take your protein pills and put your helmet on, right? Then he says to show the astronauts popularity. He says, and the papers want to know whose shirts you wear. And just to show how it feels like in space, he says, and I'm floating in a most peculiar way, and the stars look very different today. And I think that's like a way of saying it that leaves that paints a picture and leaves the rest to the listener's imagination, and I think that's beautiful. So what gives this song that sci-fi futuristic like space kind of feeling? It's really comes out through the music. I think like we saw in the Shine On You Crazy Diamond episode, it's not one of the usual instruments that you would guess. Like it's not the guitar or the drums and so on. In this song, there are a couple of novel instruments that are used. The first one is the mellotron. Sounds cool, right? Um, so the mellotron is actually one of the earliest versions of an analog sampler. So a sampler is basically uh, picking music which is already pre-recorded, right? So this means that every note on the keyboard is mapped to an actual tape recording of like a few seconds of a musician playing that note. And you could have tapes for different instruments, so which means that you could have tapes for the cello, you could have tapes for the violin. So therefore, through the mellotron, you could kind of emulate the sound of a violin or a cello, right? And add that also that electronic kind of feel to it. So in Space Oddity, they use the violin tape of the mellotron, and that's how they get that sound. The second thing is the stylophone. So here is a video of David Bowie himself playing the stylophone. So the stylophone is a pocket synthesizer which was released like around that time, probably in 67, 68. So synthesizer is basically something that electronically generates sound, and it's not like a sampler which uses pre-recorded music. So in this is almost like a toy, right? It's very small, like you can see, and you use the pen to play the notes. And as the pen touches the stylophone, the sound is electronically generated, right? So David Bowie was actually gifted this about a year before the recording, and he'd been kind of practicing on it, and he composed Space Oddity to have big sections of this to get that futuristic sound. Like you heard it, right? You would get that futuristic space sound through the stylophone, right? So these are a couple of instruments that really contribute to this song's futuristic sci-fi feel. Okay, let's dive into the music a little bit. So this song is written in the key of C major, which is very popular, especially in pop and rock. But before that, what is a key? It is basically a set of like notes and chords that go well together, and they have like a specific anchor, right? You can kind of think of it as like a color palette of sorts, which has like one anchoring color. So in the key of C major, it's the note C and the chord C major, which are the anchors. So which means um, everything will kind of resolve back to this note or this chord, right? So the key signature defines which notes or chords kind of sound good together, right? So that is what a key is. And if the song is in the key of C major, um, in a lot of music, the C major chord would be the home chord that the music resolves to, right? So the C major chord is the home chord, and then the music will kind of resolve back to that, right? Um, Interestingly, this is exactly what Space Oddity does not do, but yeah, we'll come to that. Um, so yeah, this is the key, and we'll now kind of look at typical chord progressions that you might play in this key, and then see what Space Oddity is doing. So I'm in the very early stages of learning the piano, so please excuse me if I get things wrong. Um, so typical progressions that musicians might play uh, in the key of C major could be something like a C, then an F, and then a G. So this is one, right? Or they could play a C, a G, an A minor, and then an F. So let's try that again. So if we do, so it comes back to the C after that, right? So we do C, so you see how it resolves over there. So that would be like a typical chord progression. But what is done in Space Oddity is never to come back to that, or at least in the beginning and in certain sections of the song, it doesn't kind of come back to the C. So how it goes is, so that's an F and an E minor. So the F major and an E minor. So this just keeps oscillating. So what he also does is he does not play like a basic F major chord, which sounds a bit open. What he does is he embellishes it a bit, so it sounds like, and that note adds a little bit of the feel of the song. Right? So the progression would go like. Now let's take a look at how the same thing, the same chords would sound on something like a mellotron. It's not exactly a mellotron, but it's the keyboard's emulation of a string section, so which is a closed sound. So it will go like. So there you start to feel the sci-fi feel of the song, the futuristic feel. So it's kind of, so it doesn't resolve, right? So it's kind of just these chords. It gives you like an atmospheric feel, and that forms like the backdrop of the song and gives its character and its texture. So the F major E minor progression is played in the intro and then as part of the chorus. So that gives the song the feel at those key moments. But there's also another progression which is part of the chorus, which in the lyric that ends, there's nothing I can do, which is a sort of feeling of helplessness, and the music kind of mirrors that, and that progression is, it goes like this. So that's how each chorus ends, and as the song goes on, you can feel the sadness and the helplessness that comes through. And when you layer the story that David Bowie is saying with the sound which has that sci-fi feel, it really like transports you and makes you feel that situation and makes you feel like you're in the astronaut shoes. And I think that's why this song is so beautiful, which is the lyrics, the vocals, as well as the music. They all kind of together tell a story, and that's what makes this song special. I think I wanted to take this example as well as in the previous episode with Shine On to show that how much it takes to actually produce uh, a song of high quality, and the various instruments that are involved, the songwriting that's involved, the production that actually happens behind the scenes. So it's like a huge effort, and especially for these kinds of ambitious songs which have a very distinct sound, I think that music production is very important. So I think this is one of those kinds of songs where the whole production comes together. It was a song that was ahead of its time musically, and it was very relevant at that time topically. So yeah, give it a listen if you haven't already. Uh, so yeah, that's it for this episode of Listening Sessions. See you next time.